celebrate our upcoming 50th episode, we're running a competition for our listeners. So please do send us your story. See our website for details. First prize is $75 and we'll discuss your story on the podcast. 2 runners up will receive customized feedback on their stories. And we'd love to see what you guys will send us. So thank you. Thank you for all the entries we've received so far.
Hello and welcome to the Short Story Workshop. In each episode we read a short story and then discuss it. This week's story is The Damned Thing by Ambrose, Bierce, and that title is really fun to read. Simone, you picked this story. I won't make you talk about it for too long, but can you tell us in maybe a sentence why you like it?
I loved its use of perspective and narrative structure in that it lets you draw your own conclusions. I thought that was quite contemporary for quite an old story. Also, it is a damned good title.
Heck yes it is. Alright, here is The Damned Thing by Ambrose, Bierce.
By the light of a tallow candle, which had been placed on one end of a rough table, a man was reading something written in a book. It was an old account book, greatly worn, and the writing was not, apparently, very legible, for the man sometimes held the page close to the flame of the candle to get a stronger light upon it. The shadow of the book would then throw into obscurity a half of the room, darkening a number of faces and figures, for, besides the reader, 8 other men were present. 7 of them sat against the rough log walls, silent and motionless, and the room being small, not very far from the table. By extending an arm, any one of them could have touched the 8th man, who lay on the table, face upward, partly covered by a sheet, his arms at his sides. He was dead. The man with the book was not reading aloud, and no one spoke. All seemed to be waiting for something to occur. The dead man only was without expectation. From the blank darkness outside came in, through the aperture that served for a window, all the ever unfamiliar noises of night in the wilderness. The long nameless note of a distant coyote, the stilly pulsing thrill of tireless insects in trees, strange cries of night birds so different from those of the birds of day, the drone of great blundering beetles, and all that mysterious chorus of small sounds that seem always to have been but half heard when they have suddenly ceased, as if conscious of an indiscretion. But nothing of all this was noted in that company. Its members were not overmuch addicted to idle interest in matters of no practical importance. That was obvious in every line of their rugged faces, obvious even in the dim light of the single candle. They were evidently men of the vicinity, farmers and woodmen. The person reading was a trifle different. One would have said of him that he was of the world, worldly, albeit there was that in his attire which attested a certain fellowship with the organisms of his environment. His coat would hardly have passed muster in San Francisco. His footgear was not of urban origin, and the hat that lay by him on the floor, he was the only one uncovered, was such that if one had considered it as an article of mere personal adornment, he would have missed its meaning. In countenance, the man was rather prepossessing, with just a hint of sternness, though that he may have assumed or cultivated as appropriate to one in authority. For he was a coroner. It was by virtue of his office that he had possession of the book in which he was reading. It had been found among the dead man's effects, in his cabin, where the inquest was now taking place. When the coroner had finished reading, he put the book into his breast pocket. At that moment the door was pushed open and a young man entered. He, clearly, was not of mountain birth and breeding. He was clad as those who dwell in cities. His clothing was dusty, however, as from travel. He had, in fact, been riding hard to attend the inquest. The coroner nodded. No one else greeted him. "We have waited for you," said the coroner. "It is necessary to have done with this business tonight." The young man smiled. "I am sorry to have kept you," he said. "I went away, not to evade your summons, but to post my newspaper an account of what I suppose I am called back to relate." The coroner smiled. "The account that you posted to your newspaper," he said, "differs probably from that which you will give here under oath." "That," replied the other, rather hotly and with a visible flush, "is as you choose. I use manifold paper and have a copy of what I sent. It was not written as news, for it is incredible, but as fiction. It may go as a part of my testimony under oath." "But you say it is incredible." "That is nothing to you, sir, if I also swear that it is true." The coroner was apparently not greatly affected by the young man's manifest resentment. He was silent for some moments, his eyes upon the floor. The men about the sides of the cabin talked in whispers, but seldom withdrew their gaze from the face of the corpse. Presently the coroner lifted his eyes and said, "We will resume the inquest." The men removed their hats. The witness was sworn. "What is your name?" the coroner asked. "William Harker." "Age?" 27. "You knew the deceased, Hugh Morgan?" "Yes." "You were with him when he died?" "Near him." "How did that happen? Your presence, I mean." "I was visiting him at this place to shoot and fish. A part of my purpose, however, was to study him and his odd, solitary way of life. He seemed a good model for a character in fiction. I sometimes write stories." "I sometimes read them." "Thank you." "Stories in general, not yours." Some of the jurors laughed. Against a sombre background, humour shows highlights. Soldiers in the intervals of battle laugh easily, and a jest in the death chamber conquers by surprise. "Relate the circumstances of this man's death," said the coroner. "You may use any notes or memoranda that you please." The witness understood. Pulling a manuscript from his breast pocket, he held it near the candle, and turning the leaves until he found the passage that he wanted, began to read. "The sun had hardly risen when we left the house. We were looking for quail, each with a shotgun, but we had only one dog. Morgan said that our best ground was beyond a certain ridge that he pointed out, and we crossed it by a trail through the chaparral. On the other side was comparatively level ground, thickly covered with wild oats. As we emerged from the chaparral, Morgan was but a few yards in advance. Suddenly we heard, at a little distance to our right, and partly in front, a noise as of some animal thrashing about in the bushes, which we could see were violently agitated. "We've started a deer," I said. "I wish we had brought a rifle." Morgan, who had stopped and was intently watching the agitated chaparral, said nothing, but had cocked both barrels of his gun and was holding it in readiness to aim. I thought him a trifle excited, which surprised me, for he had a reputation for exceptional coolness, even in moments of sudden and imminent peril. "Oh, come," I said. "You're not going to fill up a deer with quail shot, are you?" Still he did not reply, but catching a sight of his face as he turned it slightly toward me, I was struck by the pallor of it. Then I understood that we had serious business on hand, and my first conjecture was that we had jumped a grizzly. I advanced to Morgan's side, cocking my piece as I moved. The bushes were now quiet and the sounds had ceased, but Morgan was as attentive to the place as before. "What is it? What the devil is it?" I asked. "That damned thing," he replied, without turning his head. His voice was husky and unnatural. He trembled visibly. I was about to speak further when I observed the wild oats near the place of the disturbance moving in the most inexplicable way. I can hardly describe it. It seemed as if stirred by a streak of wind, which not only bent it, but pressed it down, crushed it so that it did not rise, and this movement was slowly prolonging itself directly towards us. Nothing that I had ever seen had affected me so strangely as this unfamiliar and unaccountable phenomenon, yet I am unable to recall any sense of fear. I remember, and tell it here because, singularly enough, I recollected it then, that once, in looking carelessly out of an open window, I momentarily mistook a small tree close at hand for one of a group of larger trees at a little distance away. It looked the same size as the others, but being more distinctly and sharply defined in mass and detail, seemed out of harmony with them. It was a mere falsification of the law of aerial perspective, but it startled, almost terrified me. We so rely upon the orderly operation of familiar natural laws that any seeming suspension of them is noted as a menace to our safety, a warning of unthinkable calamity. So now the apparent causeless movement of the herbage and the slow, undeviating approach of the line of disturbance were distinctly disquieting. My companion appeared actually frightened, and I could hardly credit my senses when I saw him suddenly throw his gun to his shoulders and fire both barrels at the agitated grass. Before the smoke of the discharge had cleared away, I heard a loud, savage cry, a scream like that of a wild animal, and flinging his gun upon the ground, Morgan sprang away and ran swiftly from the spot. At the same instant I was thrown violently to the ground by the impact of something unseen in the smoke, some soft, heavy substance that seemed thrown against me with great force. Before I could get upon my feet and recover my gun, which seemed to have been struck from my hands, I heard Morgan crying out as if in mortal agony, and mingling with his cries were such hoarse, savage sounds as one hears from fighting dogs. Inexpressibly terrified, I struggled to my feet and looked in the direction of Morgan's retreat. And may heaven in mercy spare me from another sight like that. At a distance of less than 30 yards was my friend, down upon one knee, his head thrown back at a frightful angle, hatless, his long hair in disorder, and his whole body in violent movement from side to side, backward and forward. His right arm was lifted and seemed to lack the hand, at least I could see none. The other arm was invisible. At times, as my memory now reports this extraordinary scene, I could discern but a part of his body. It was as if he had been partly blotted out. I could not otherwise express it. Then a shifting of his position would bring it all into view again. All this must have occurred within a few seconds. Yet in that time Morgan assumed all the postures of a determined wrestler, vanquished by superior weight and strength. I saw nothing but him, and him not always distinctly. During the entire incident his shouts and curses were heard, as if through an enveloping uproar of such sounds of rage and fury as I had never heard from the throat of man or brute. For a moment only I stood irresolute, then, throwing down my gun, I ran forward to my friend's assistance. I had a vague belief that he was suffering from a fit or some form of convulsion. Before I could reach his side he was down and quiet. All sound had ceased, but with a feeling of such terror as even these awful events had not inspired, I now saw the same mysterious movement of the wild oats prolonging itself from the trampled area about the prostrate man toward the edge of a wood. It was only when I had reached the wood that I was able to withdraw my eyes and look at my companion. He was dead. The coroner rose from his seat and stood beside the dead man. Lifting an edge of the sheet, he pulled it away, exposing the entire body, altogether naked and showing in the candlelight a clay-like yellow. It had, however, broad maculations of bluish-black, obviously caused by extravasated blood from contusions. The chest and sides looked as if they had been beaten with a bludgeon. There were dreadful lacerations, the skin was torn in strips and shreds. The coroner moved round to the end of the table and undid a silk handkerchief, which had been passed under the chin and knotted on top of the head. When the handkerchief was drawn away, it exposed what had been the throat. Some of the jurors who had risen to get a better view repented their curiosity and turned away their faces. Witness Harker went to the open window and leaned out across the sill, faint and sick. Dropping the handkerchief upon the dead man's neck, the coroner stepped to an angle of the room and from a pile of clothing produced one garment after another, each of which he held up a moment for inspection. All were torn and stiff with blood. The jurors did not make a closer inspection. They seemed rather uninterested. They had, in truth, seen all this before. The only thing that was new to them was Harker's testimony. "Gentlemen," the coroner said, "we have no more evidence, I think. Your duty has already been explained to you. If there is nothing you wish to ask, you may go outside and consider your verdict." The foreman rose, a tall, bearded man of 60, coarsely clad. "I should like to ask one question, Mr. Coroner," he said. "What asylum did this year last witness escape from?" "Mr. Harker," said the coroner, gravely and tranquilly, "from what asylum did you last escape?" Harker flushed crimson again, but said nothing, and the 7 jurors rose and solemnly filed out of the cabin. "If you have done insulting me, sir," said Harker, as soon as he and the officer were left alone with the dead man, "I suppose I am at liberty to go?" "Yes." Harker started to leave, but paused, with his hand on the door latch. The habit of his profession was strong in him, stronger than his sense of personal dignity. He turned about and said, "The book you have there, I recognize it as Morgan's diary. You seemed greatly interested in it. You read in it while I was testifying. May I see it? The public would like." "The book will cut no figure in this matter," replied the official, slipping it into his coat pocket. "All the entries in it were made before the writer's death." As Harker passed out of the house, the jury re-entered and stood about the table on which the now covered corpse showed under the sheet with sharp definition. The foreman seated himself near the candle, produced from his breast pocket a pencil and scrap of paper, and wrote rather laboriously the following verdict, which with various degrees of effort all signed. "We, the jury, do find that the remains come to their death at the hands of a mountain lion, but some of us thinks, all the same, they had fits." In the diary of the late Hugh Morgan, are certain interesting entries having possibly a scientific value as suggestions. At the inquest upon his body, the book was not put into evidence. Possibly the coroner thought it not worthwhile to confuse the jury. The date of the first of the entries mentioned could not be ascertained. The upper part of the leaf is torn away. The part of the entry remaining is as follows. Would run in a half circle, keeping his head turned always towards the centre, and again he would stand still, barking furiously. At last he ran away into the brush as fast as he could go. I thought at first that he had gone mad, but on returning to the house found no other alteration in his manner than what was obviously due to fear of punishment. Can a dog see with his nose? Do odours impress some olfactory centre with images of the thing emitting them? September the 2nd. Looking at the stars last night as they rose above the crest of the ridge east of the house, I observed them successively disappear, from left to right. Each was eclipsed but an instant, and only a few at the same time, but along the entire length of the ridge all that were within a degree or two of the crest were blotted out. It was as if something had passed along between me and them, but I could not see it, and the stars were not thick enough to define its outline. I don't like this. Several weeks' entries are missing, 3 leaves being torn from the book. September 27th. It has been about here again. I find evidences of its presence every day. I watched again all of last night in the same cover, gun in hand, double charged with buckshot. In the morning the fresh footprints were there as before. Yet I would have sworn that I did not sleep. Indeed, I hardly sleep at all. It is terrible, insupportable. If these amazing experiences are real, I shall go mad. If they are fanciful, I am mad already. October 3rd. I shall not go. It shall not drive me away. No, this is my house, my land. God hates a coward. October 5th. I can stand it no longer. I have invited Harker to pass a few weeks with me. He has a level head. I can judge from his manner if he thinks me mad. October 7th. I have the solution of the problem. It came to me last night, suddenly, as by revelation. How simple, how terribly simple. There are sounds that we cannot hear. At either end of the scale are notes that stir no chord of that imperfect instrument, the human ear. They are too high or too grave. I have observed a flock of blackbirds occupying an entire treetop, the tops of several trees, and all in full song. Suddenly, in a moment, at absolutely the same instant, all spring into the air and fly away. How? They could not all see one another. Whole treetops intervened. At no point could a leader have been visible to all. There must have been a signal of warning or command, high and shrill above the din, but by me unheard. I have observed, too, the same simultaneous flight when all was silent among not only blackbirds but other birds, quail, for example, widely separated by bushes, even on opposite sides of a hill. It is known to seamen that a school of whales, basking or sporting on the surface of the ocean, miles apart, with the convexity of the earth between them, will sometimes dive at the same instant, all gone out of sight in a moment. The signal has been sounded, too grave for the ear of the sailor at the masthead and his comrades on the deck, who nevertheless feel its vibrations in the ship as the stones of a cathedral are stirred by the bass of the organ. As with sounds, so with colours. At each end of the solar spectrum, the chemist can detect the presence of what are known as actinic rays. They represent colours, integral colours in the composition of light, which we are unable to discern. The human eye is an imperfect instrument. Its range is but a few octaves of the real chromatic scale. I am not mad. There are colours that we cannot see. And God help me, the damned thing is of such a colour.
I liked this story. I thought it was very interesting in the way it was told. Maybe almost forensic in the way it was told, because it kind of gives you all these little bits of evidence from different places and then lets you kind of decide what you think before you reach the end, or maybe even after you reach the end you're still thinking about, what really happened? And I kind of liked that it did that. What did you think of it, Matt?
Yeah, you're quite right. It has this very distant perspective that works really well and kind of contrasts with what we're used to, of having like lots of emotion in our stories and character focus. This doesn't bother with that. It just gives you the facts as the characters would explain them. and then lets you decide what you think. And I quite liked it. It fit really nice with the setting as well, of having the jurors trying to decide what's going on. And it's just compellingly written. I always like the kind of concepts where it's something just slightly outside of human perception, and I thought this was a pretty good way of approaching it.
It felt very forensic. I agree, and I like that they kind of use the coroner as the main pinpoint, I guess, for the story with the different perspectives, and kind of withheld information, like with the diary and the different versions that the characters themselves wouldn't necessarily know.
Yeah, I think what you said, Matt, about it being just giving you the facts, put the finger on what was kind of bothering me about the story, because I was like, best word I could come up with was forensic. It reminded me of being in like an Ace Attorney case where you've got all the evidence and then you have to pick which bits you think contradict the witnesses. I don't know, rambling.
It reads like a court case.
Yeah.
Yes, and especially because you've got like jurors and things. Did you think as a reader you were supposed to kind of be in a position of juror as well, or?
Yes, I did think that.
Which I thought was really clever.
I was going to say the other thing about the forensic tone is that I think it kind of contrasts really nicely with the supernatural goings-on, or potentially supernatural goings-on of the story, because it's the science and mystical often kind of presented as completely different, but here they're kind of together, which I liked.
Yeah, I like that as well, because science is often our way of explaining the world. If you can try and almost fit your supernatural thing into science in some way, it adds plausibility, and then just the fact that it doesn't fit completely makes it weirder.
It helps ground it. I think we've talked about different ways you can ground stories before, and usually I think setting is commonly used, or maybe an element of a character. I like that the very structure of this story is the thing that grounds it. So the story offers, I'd say, 3 different perspectives of events surrounding the damned thing. So you've got the coroner who's kind of looking at the body, you've got the friend who kind of gives his version, and then you have the diary at the end. Which one of these did you think was the most compelling, or did you find them all compelling in their own way?
They all kind of lead you on to the next. I quite like the description from the friend, because it's distant enough to give you feel like you have a reliable source, if you know what I mean, but it's close enough that you actually get some idea of what's happening.
Yeah.
So I did like that part.
Like, you feel like you'd notice a mountain lion.
Well, you would, yes. But I think the point was that people try and find a plausible explanation even when one isn't necessarily there, right?
I think some people are just so highly skeptical that they'll kind of jump on something and then be like, well, it must have been this. There's no other explanation, so this is the one that must be true.
I did find it a bit strange that there wasn't more of a conflict around finding out the truth or the juror's decision, because the coroner basically just hides this diary entry from them, which, I mean, that's just something that happens. It doesn't really come up again, and he doesn't really explain why. He just says, oh, I guess simplify it, it won't affect the case or something. I would have expected there to have been a bit more conflict around that, but I guess we don't need it, maybe.
And I guess it's making a point that people like to take the easy answer. They're so quick to disbelieve the friend and the supernatural part of it, just because it's something that they can't see.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to feel a bit strange that they're all just like, oh, it's probably a mountain lion. And that's the point.
It makes you wonder if it's happened before.
Did you all kind of smile at the bit where they're like, can you ask the witness which asylum they escaped from?
That made me laugh, particularly the deadpan way he didn't ask you, which asylum did you escape from?
Just, I mean, I appreciate the humour. I just thought it was a bit odd in this otherwise quite serious story, I suppose.
It talks a little bit earlier in the story about humour. What was it? There was that joke at the start. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, it's the idea that humour lightens situations.
Are you talking about the conversation he has with the coroner where he says, the account that you posted to your newspaper differs probably from which you will give here under oath? And then he's like, well, if you say so, it may go as a part of my testimony under oath, as if to say, well, no, that's the truth. I didn't just jazz it up for the newspapers.
No, that's not the bit I'm thinking of.
Okay, which bit are you thinking of?
I'm thinking of the bit where he says, I sometimes write stories, and then the other guy says, I sometimes read them. And then he says, stories in general, not yours. Yeah.
Oh, right.
That coroner's just vicious. He's got my sense of humour.
As if I'd read your stories.
Exactly. It says, against a somber background, humour shows highlights, right? It's kind of the same idea. So later on, when they're talking about asylums, it seems a bit odd, but I think it's supposed to be kind of funny. And then I don't know, it just shows that humour often comes out in these dark situations. So it's kind of echoing back to that what was mentioned earlier.
It also kind of conveys how practical the coroner is, in the sense like he hides the diary and he just kind of is very deadpan in general.
True. I like how all the character building in this story is done not really by saying how the characters are, but it's all done by showing or physical description, and that's it.
Is the coroner your favourite example, or did you like another one as well, particularly?
I mean, the others don't really have that much to go on.
Do you like this coroner? He has some sass. I was just going to say that I liked reading the diary at the end a lot. I don't know, it kind of satisfied the mystery without wholly answering it, which I appreciated. I find the perspective switching very interesting. I would have liked another paragraph from the point of view of the damned thing. Like, that would have made the story really fun for me. But I guess it's quite hard because you don't want to, like, ruin the mystery of the damned thing.
Yeah, like we don't know what it is, so we don't even know if it's fully sentient at this point. So giving it a perspective, I think, would probably ruin the story for me. But I could see like another perspective from another character kind of coming across it, I guess, just to kind of round off the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think it's fine how it is, rule of 3, you know?
Rule of 3 is there for a reason, it's true.
It is.
And I agree that adding a perspective from the thing would, I don't know, it just makes it too tangible, in my opinion.
The whole point is that it's something just slightly out of human ability to perceive.
I just more felt like it would complete the pattern, because you kind of have a stranger's perspective, a friend's perspective, the victim's perspectives, and then like the killer's perspective. It just would have felt complete.
I feel like it's missing for a reason.
It's definitely missing for a reason, but I like what ifs. We were doing another sequel challenge. I'd be coming for this one.
I mean, writing a story from the perspective of the monster brings its own set of challenges.
Yeah.
It would be really interesting.
Okay, so I think we've already talked a little bit about how the story is structured. I like the perspective switching. I like that it kind of presents you with a case almost. We have a guy, he's been murdered by something, but we don't know what it is. We have this guy to testify. Here's what the jury think. Here's his diary. What do you think? That's what I feel like the end of the story is. Like, what do you think happened? And I quite like that question is never answered.
I think the structure is really strong. I also like to point to the start of the story before you really know what's happening, before you know that there's a jury or anything like this. It just paints the scene, and it paints it in such a way as to be intriguing and makes you wonder what's happening. And then you get to the end of the first paragraph and you say, okay, there's a dead guy here, and it just slowly unfolds what the situation is. I thought that was really compelling.
I like the writing style. He had some interesting turn of phrase. Like, I just the way he kind of reveals things like, well, he was a coroner. I don't know. It just feels like the narrator's really enjoying telling us about it.
It's a little bit theatrical, maybe.
Yeah.
It's quite formal. It's quite detailed. It kind of goes on in its sentences. It's quite long-winded in some places, I feel.
It was like 1896 or something.
Yeah, it was. I think this probably helped give it its more factual feel, like we were saying earlier. Like, it felt more like you were reading a report or something.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I could see that. But I also just think that whenever I read older writing styles, they always have that kind of vibe of being slightly more long-winded.
Yeah, so it's just interesting in the way that language is condensed, especially with the internet now.
And nowadays, there's much more of a demand for immediacy. If something doesn't happen in the opening of your story, people lose interest.
I think another reason why they had this slightly more elaborate style is to gain respect, basically.
Yeah.
You want to prove to the person reading quite quickly that you have a mastery over the English language, and I think that was a lot more important back in the day, and now we have a bit more understanding of the fact that simple doesn't mean stupid.
Yeah. I remember, like, at one point in every class, it felt like the teachers were busting out that acronym KISS.
What?
Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah.
The fact that Simone said what makes me think this community college thing.
No, I've heard it other places. I'm sure I have.
I have not, but it's not to my memory.
Anyway, I think that's the reason. That is another thing that people sometimes forget, is that certain times you want to write in such a way as to show that you know how to write.
So essentially you want to show off.
Yeah.
And other times you're paid by the word.
That is a good point. I didn't think of that. And as a journalist, I don't know how journalism worked back then, but I expect it's similar.
Like, I've been paid by the word before, and let me tell you, way more description than my normal.
One more thing about the structure. I like how, even though we're keeping from a very distant perspective, we don't get inside these characters' heads or anything. We are, in a sense, changing our narrative distance throughout the story just by changing through these perspectives, because at the start we don't know anything about what has happened. And then we get the introduction of the damned thing, and each perspective brings us a little bit closer to it, right? And I like that. That adds this kind of sense of progression where you are steadily moving deeper into the mystery. Well, that was really smart.
That was smart. That was an excellent point. There's something intimate about diaries, and yet at the same time, it's the most untrustworthy of all of the accounts.
Right, yeah.
But then it's a personal diary. He has no reason to lie in it.
That's the one I believed the most.
And that's the direct account of experience with the creature firsthand in the most detail.
But then he could just be insane.
It's true.
Yeah, he could be insane, but something murdered him.
A mountain lion. Didn't you hear them?
A mountain lion? My gosh, I thought they only ate, like, deers or something.
Well, I guess I was just saying, even though it's structured in like 3 different parts, there's a clear progression. It's been very careful the way they are linked together.
Yeah, I do like that sense of progression. That you're slowly getting closer to solving the mystery.
Do we have any tips for structuring stories? We've talked about structure a lot.
Progression is everything. If I can't tell that something is progressing, I will get bored.
Can you expand on that? Like, what are some ways to progress novels?
Well, depends what the focus of your story is. If it's a mystery, you need to be learning new information. If it's a character story, your character has to be changing, or at least have some hint that your character is going to change. So it's things like this.
Yeah, I'd say change is key, so have a start point and end point, and then work out how you get from A to B. That's always how I do short stories. So the story is like how the thing becomes B. You start somewhere, then how are you going to get to it? And the how depends on what kind of story it is.
You can even work this into your structure. That's what this story does really well, is that just by switching perspectives, you have that progression.
Other things about structure. Even if you don't answer all the questions at the end, you should answer enough that leaves the reader feeling like satisfied, which is easier said than done.
Yes, like, if you propose one key question at the start of the novel, that's the one you should have answered by the end of it. Even if you've then raised other questions throughout the novel that you haven't answered, for example, if you're setting up a sequel. And you can leave things open-ended so that the reader can decide on their own answer to the question. But if so, you should give them evidence to kind of form an answer, even if you don't explicitly state it in text.
Yeah, something this one does really well. Otherwise, I mean, you can use 3-act structure in micro form in short stories.
There are many different kinds of structures.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure we'll discuss at length when they come up, right?
Did anyone else kind of want the coroner to be murdered at the end?
No, I liked the coroner.
I mean, I liked him, but also there would have been some satisfaction to it.
Why'd you say that?
I know, he was so quick to let them dismiss it.
Guess so, and he did hide the diary, so,
Like, I don't know, he's playing God with the information. It's not his call.
If he had told the truth, maybe they could have come up with some way to protect people against the damned thing.
Yes, whatever it may be.
That would be an interesting way to take the story. So, the end of the story details this theory about colours that can't be seen by the human eye to explain the damned thing. Now, I thought this kind of shifted the tone of the story a bit from, I guess, quite a realistic kind of mystery to a more sci-fi sort of thing. Do you agree with that, or?
I mean, do you mean sci-fi in the sense that it's more scientific or that it's more fictional?
Yeah, I mean, it makes it feel more like fiction, like it's a science fiction thing rather than a kind of more realistic court case kind of thing.
Like, you know, if he's actually killed by a mountain lion, that's a bit of a dull story.
No, I did like it. I just thought it changed. I changed the way I read it a little bit.
I'm confused about what you mean.
I mean that when I first read it, I thought, okay, this is obviously like set in the real world. There's probably a plausible explanation for this that is real. And then you get to the end and it's like, Things you can't see, which feels like such a sci-fi concept.
But that's actual science, though.
What, that there's things you can't see and
Yeah.
that they kill people.
Okay, that part maybe not. Well, you can't see radiation and that kills people. You ever think about that? No, I find it quite strange because to me, the presence of science at the end of the story is what grounds it and makes it realistic, whereas you're saying you thought it made it more fictional.
Yes.
That's interesting.
I don't know. It doesn't ring true to me for some reason. I don't know. Maybe because I've kind of seen the concept in other stories. But yeah, we'll agree to disagree on that one. So, final question. Fun question. Did you imagine the damned thing? And what did you imagine it was like?
Well, I thought it was a mountain lion, but then they say how it blots out the stars, and I realised it could probably fly, and then I got quite confused. Mountain lion with wings?
Wait, did you actually think it was a mountain lion?
Well, probably not, but they have reason to think that it is a mountain lion. But if they were presented with the wounds inflicted by this thing and were like, probably a lion, then it's probably at least the same kind of size.
I mean, not necessarily. Like, mountain lion feels like a kind of famous excuse. In Twilight, they all say all the vampire attacks were mountain lions. Someone's bloodied up, probably a mountain lion.
Well, it must be some kind of large...
thing with teeth like a mountain lion.
Or a bear or something like that, except it flies.
I imagined it had hands with teeth on it.
What the hell?
I don't know, okay?
like just mouth hands?
Yeah.
Some Yu-Gi-Oh stuff right there.
Oh no, you can tell I'm a fan. Because he's obviously got bite marks on him. And
Yep.
like something with a mouth, maybe something with more than one mouth, something with mouths on hands, on arms, I don't know. I just imagined something with lots of teeth, basically is what I'm saying.
I think I imagined it as a spirit rather than something physical, even though it left physical wounds.
That's interesting. Oh, is that because you can't see it?
Yeah.
So we all have our own interpretations, I suppose.
That's kind of what I like about this story. You can imagine whatever you want. Also, I like seeing what everyone else imagines. Okay, did anybody have any further thoughts on the story?
Just that the ending reminds me of Colour Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft, where there's a colour that lands on the planet that's alien and no one's ever seen it before, and it drives people crazy.
All roads lead back to Lovecraft review.
Not all roads.
70% of roads.
It's a story with the same concept. How can I not bring it up?
I'm mostly teasing you.
So if you like this story, then read the Lovecraft story.
Still have no idea why the damned thing killed the person.
For some reason, I think I assumed it was territorial.
Maybe. It does mention land. But then why doesn't it go after the friend?
That's a very good point. I guess we'll never know. It's just a monster. There's a spider crawling around on my window, which is why I'm a bit distracted. The damned thing! It's fine. I can make it to the end of the episode and then I will rescue it and get it out of here because I don't want to sleep with a spider in here. Really, my damned thing should be spider shaped if it's something that I don't like. I will talk a little bit about Ambrose, Bierce, the 10th of 13 children, and all their names began with A.
Why would you do this?
Why would you do this indeed? I can probably find and read the names for you if you would like to hear them all.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
You can judge this family.
I want to see if you can spot the point where they were running out of names beginning with A.
I mean, he was number 10 of 13. That's quite a lot.
Why would you want to have that many children? I can barely deal with 2 cats.
So they were, in order of birth, Abigail, Amelia, Anne, Addison, Aurelius, Augustus, Almeida, Andrew, Albert, Ambrose, Arthur, Adelia, and Aurelia.
Jesus Christ.
They were running out because they used Aurelius and Aurelia. So...
That must be kind of insulting. You're just like this other guy but gender flipped. How do you feel?
It's quite impressive they could think of all those names beginning with A, unless they had like baby name books.
Maybe it was a family tradition for all of their, parents named with like a B or a Z or something.
Maybe. He was born in Ohio, grew up in Indiana. It's Indiana, not Indiana, isn't it?
Yeah.
Indiana?
I don't know how to say
It
things.
is indeed Indiana.
Thank you.
I don't think I've ever heard Indiana.
I think you say Indiana.
Okay, from now on I shall say that. Anyway, Ambrose, he was involved in the American Civil War. He rescued a comrade quite bravely because obviously lots of shooting people and dying going on everywhere, which inspired several of his stories. I think the war had a profound impact on him for the rest of his life. He was known for being quite a cynical chap, not the happiest fellow. His nickname was Bitter Bierce. He was a reporter and editor for a number of papers in San Francisco.
I was going to say, how are you pronouncing San Francisco?
I cannot say San Francisco today. Oh well. He got one of his editors, Hearst, into a fair bit of trouble over various things because I think his manner was quite caustic. Even cost the guy a political campaign. But Hearst didn't seem to mind and kept him employed, so I guess they must have had quite a deep friendship. In 1913, he disappeared. He said he wanted to get first-hand experience of the Mexican Revolution, so he went to Mexico, and he did not come back. And to this day, we don't really know what happened to him. Rumour has it that he was executed, but nothing's ever been confirmed, and I believe the mystery of his disappearance has been brought up in several fictional works, films, etc. So yeah, a bit of a mystery around where he went. But, I mean, if you go into a war zone, I mean, you probably get caught in the crossfire. I don't know if he went because he wanted to do a report on it, or if he was just curious. It sounds like he was just like, I want to go and see what this is about. But maybe Wiki doesn't quite phrase it properly.
Some people are just thrill seekers.
Critic St. Joshi
Our
said,
favourite.
Bierce, our favourite guy, who's all over Wikipedia, says, Bierce will remain an equivocal figure in American and world literature, chiefly because his dark view of humanity is, by its very nature, unpopular. Most people like writing that is cheerful and uplifting, even though a substantial proportion of the world's great literature is quite otherwise.
Interesting take.
Yeah, I would say his view is not unpopular.
Maybe. Not nowadays.
A lot easier to write darker things, I think. Humans tend towards negative emotions easier.
Or perhaps the world has become more cynical. Okay, that is all I have for you about Ambrose Bierce, unless you have anything to add. I'm going to go with no. Okay, thank you for listening. Please leave a comment on our website, www.theshortstoryworkshop.com, to let us know what you thought. You can also find all our previous short stories and episodes. We'll be back with another story next week. Goodbye.